Welcome to this news event sponsored by my law firm, Peiffer, Wolf, Carr, and Kane. My name is Adam Wolf. I'm a partner with Peiffer Wolf. We're here today to do two things. First, to unveil a new issue briefer that outlines the growing number of abuses occurring in the Wild West of the unregulated fertility center industry. Second, we will announce a major new court case being filed today involving yet another fertility center tragedy. Unfortunately, misconduct and tragedies at fertility centers in the United States are growing rapidly. One major problem is the lack of oversight. As you will hear in this nation, nail salons are subject to far tighter state and federal controls than U.S. fertility clinics. Before I continue with my opening statement, I want to just explain how things will work today. I will be outlining the key points of the Peiffer-Wolf issue briefer on the scope of the fertility center problem and possible solutions. Attorney Joseph Peiffer will provide an overview of the new fertility center lawsuit that we are filing today. Then you will hear from Joseph Loney, the father of the Columbus, Ohio area family at the heart of the new lawsuit. It will be followed by the first of two experts, Naomi Kahn, professor at GW University Law School and author of the book Test Tube Families: Why the Fertility Market Needs Legal Regulation, and Dr. Amel Elgrani, reader in law and former associate dean in the School of Law and Social Justice, University of Liverpool, UK, and author of Regulating Assisted Reproductive Technologies, New Horizons. We want to thank Joe Cardelloni, Dr. Kahn, and Dr. Elgrani for joining us today. I would ask that you hold your questions until the Q&A period after our statements. There will be ample time for your questions. Peiffer-Wolf speaks from a position of authority on fertility center abuses. We are currently working with hundreds of fertility center clients, including the Los Angeles couple who had their embryo implanted in a stranger by Cha Fertility and then had to go to court to recover their child and bring him home. Peiffer-Wolf is also a major player in litigation surrounding the large-scale embryo losses during the spring of 2018 at Pacific Fertility Center in San Francisco and University Hospitals in Cleveland, Ohio. We have represented hundreds of victims of fertility center misconduct over the span of many years. It is because of all of this work that we are so concerned. The roots and possible solutions to the worsening situation in the fertility center industry are addressed in the new Peiffer-Wolf issue briefer, The Fertility Center Regulation Crisis in the U.S. It concludes that the $2.1 billion fertility center industry in the United States is big business. More than 1 out of 10 women end up seeking out fertility-related services from 480 U.S. clinics, resulting in 69,000 live births per year, nearly 2% of all children born in the United States. Yet, U.S. fertility centers are almost entirely unregulated today, unlike the tighter oversight you see in countries like Estonia, Abu Dhabi, Germany, and the UK. In the U.S., nail salons are subject to far tighter controls under state and federal law than fertility clinics. For U.S. fertility centers, the result is a near Wild West situation where meaningful oversight is absent, error reporting is essentially voluntary, and tragic cases of lost, destroyed, or otherwise improperly handled eggs and embryos are on the rise. This includes more than 5,000 eggs and embryos known to have been lost or destroyed in less than 2 years. As one expert notes, America's hands-off approach to oversight of reproductive practices has left, quote, a gaping hole for a booming, unregulated market fraught with fraud and abuse. In 2016, a national ratings website found that 18 to 24% of fertility patients reported damaged or destroyed samples, among a host of other errors. Where could the United States turn for a model to regulate fertility clinics? In the UK, a national agency requires that all facilities comply with a standard of professional conduct that covers all details of the clinical and embryological practice associated with assisted reproductive technology. That agency is the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, the HFEA, which has been in operation since 1990, conducting regular fertility center inspections, seeking corrective actions where needed, and publicizing all findings and regulatory actions. The HFEA oversees nearly every aspect of 69,000 procedures per year at the 131 licensed clinics in the UK. The HFEA's actions are highly transparent, including the online publication of the outcomes of all clinic inspections. It also provides the public with information about IVF and other assisted reproductive technology procedures. In closing, I would like to share some impressions I've gathered in working with hundreds of families and individuals who've had their hopes and dreams dashed by misconduct in the U.S. fertility center industry. As consumers, we think of fertility clinics as highly professional organizations governed by strict rules and staffed by caring experts. And some of them, indeed, are well-meaning and well-run. But the truth is that some of them are simply business people making billions of dollars in profits. The bottom line is that self-regulation for fertility centers is just not working. We need to look to the UK and come up with a similar way of policing the US fertility industry, which clearly is not capable of keeping its own house in order. That concludes my opening statement. I would now like to introduce Peiffer Wolf Managing Partner, Joe Peiffer, who will talk you through the new case that we are filing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Today, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Loney family due to the fertility center misconduct of Cincinnati's Institute for Reproductive Health, the Associated Christ Hospital, and the Ovation Fertility. What happened? In short, Rebecca Loney learned from a home DNA kit, a Christmas gift, that Joseph Loney was not her biological father, and instead, her actual biological father may have been a doctor at the Cincinnati hospital. How could this happen? Like millions of Americans, Jennifer and Joseph Loney turned to a fertility clinic to help them fulfill their dream of having a child. They trusted the Christ Hospital and the Greater Cincinnati Institute for Reproductive Health. The fertility centers promised that they would use Jennifer's eggs and Joseph's sperm to create an embryo. Instead, they combined Jennifer's eggs with a stranger's sperm and then inserted that embryo into Jennifer. Through remarkable strength and perseverance, the Loney family has traced the likely biological father to one of a handful of individuals. One of these individuals worked at the Christ Hospital. This is a massive betrayal of trust and an unthinkable breach of trust. IVF requires that trust. It requires a trust between the families and the fertility centers. And they trust at least one thing is going to happen when they go to the fertility center, and that is that if you provide the sperm and your partner provides the egg, that sperm and that egg will be used for your embryo and for your child. After all, the creation of an embryo is conducted behind the veil of a laboratory wall. Clients trust the fertility centers with their most intimate personal property during this process. At all times following the transfer at the Institute, in other words, the implantation of the embryo, Until their startling discovery from the home DNA test kit, Jennifer and Joseph Cardelloni believed that Rebecca was biologically related to both of them. Rebecca also believed that she was biologically related to both of her parents. The Christ Hospital breached trust and shattered the Cardelloni's understanding of their own family identity. The effects of this unthinkable misconduct will be felt forever. Despite all this, the Fertility Center has refused to make amends. It's refused to take responsibility. They have not even apologized to this family. Unfortunately, the case we are filing here today is merely just one more illustration of an out-of-control, unregulated industry. This never should have happened, and we're going to get justice for the Cardelloni's. But more than that, we're going to help to see that this doesn't happen again by bringing regulation to an industry that has none. Big Fertility needs to be held accountable. Since they're unwilling and unable to do it themselves, we intend to bring accountability to Big Fertility. Thank you. Mr. Cardelloni will be speaking next.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Cardelloni. I live in Delaware, Ohio, just outside of Columbus. It's hard to explain the shock and agony when you find out that someone you love and care for, your own daughter, is not genetically related to you. My daughter Becca's DNA does not contain any of my or my Italian family's genetic history and makeup. There's a mix of anger, pain, and confusion that comes along with having to accept this and having to break the news to our family. This has been extremely difficult for my family. I never would have imagined the Christmas gift of home DNA kit would unveil this kind of abuse of our trust. For our daughter, Rebecca, it's even tougher. She's experiencing significant emotional distress and confusion concerning her own identity. She has no idea who her biological father is. She now knows nothing about half of her genetic background, her family history and medical history. I'm not talking about distant relatives or ancestors. I'm talking about brothers and sisters and grandparents. My wife, Jennifer, is still in shock. She has to deal with the fact that this clinic and Dr. Awadallah and Dr. Benke fertilized her eggs with a complete stranger's sperm and placed them in her body. She's also faced with a difficult series of emotional challenges and questions. She's profoundly disappointed that she can no longer give birth to a child with both of our genetics. And that's exactly why we sought the help of Drs. Awadallah and Benke in the first place. I've learned that we are not alone in suffering tragedy at the hands of a fertility clinic. Our story is just one example of the many abuses by the fertility clinic industry, and that just infuriates me. We keep asking, why hasn't someone done something about this already? We're talking about the creation of life. There needs to be stronger oversight and controls put in place. These clinics need to be held accountable, and they need to suffer real consequences for their actions. We're willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that this doesn't happen again to anyone else. We need some common sense regulation in this industry. That's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm willing to talk about this highly personal matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And now we're going to hear from Professor Kahn.
Thank you, Joseph. I have to say, it's hard to follow you. Assisted reproductive technology has been an invaluable benefit to many of us, allowing millions of people to create new families. In fact, as Adam mentioned at the start, almost 2% of children in the United States are born each year through assisted reproductive technology, and more than 10% of women have sought fertility services. Yet art-assisted reproductive technology raises complex issues as the lawsuit, as the pain of this family, and as the underlying issue briefers show. So complex legal and public policy issues that touch on the integrity of the professionals at the core of the reproductive technology industry. This case calls into question normal operating procedures in vitro fertilization. There are few laws in the United States that are directly concerned with regulating assisted reproductive technology, and yet, as an increasing number of people use fertility services, the industry has outpaced regulation, and we are hearing about more and more abuses that happen in the fertility industry. At the federal level, just a little bit of background here, at the federal level, laboratories engaged in assisted reproduction are certified by organizations such as the American College of Pathologists. This certification does not necessarily cover embryology labs, which involve the retrieval of eggs, their fertilization and transfer and storage. Federal law instead focuses on two additional aspects. It asks fertility clinics to report to the Centers for Disease Control how often their patients get pregnant. The 12% of clinics that don't comply with that federal law still continue operating. Second, federal law directs the Food and Drug Administration to screen human donors and tissues for infectious diseases and risks of communicable diseases. This doesn't cover genetic testing. There is no verifying of the information that is actually provided. At the state level, laws are mostly limited to dealing with embryonic stem cell research, insurance coverage for infertility treatment, only a few states do that, surrogacy rules, and a few states regulate the embryology labs, the labs that deal with in vitro fertilization. Self-regulatory organizations establish standards and guidelines, but these are standards and guidelines. They are voluntary and fall incredibly short, as you've already heard, of what is needed. So why not more regulation? Hopefully everybody is asking. At least three factors explain the regulatory vacuum. First is the market-oriented outlook on reproduction that wants as little oversight as possible. Second, the multi-billion-dollar fertility industry believes firmly in self-regulation. Third is the limited public awareness of the issues surrounding reproductive technology. Until now, there has been no wave of advocacy for regulation. Yet there are plenty of abuses, as this lawsuit and the other lawsuits discussed today show, and there is clearly a need for additional governmental oversight, as seen in the United Kingdom and many other countries, in the form of minimal standards such as strict licensing to operate, tougher inspection of clinics and labs, robust record-keeping standards, including of sperm and egg donation. This is not a slippery slope, but a list of minimally necessary steps to prevent future events that result in the types of damages we've heard about today. Given the frequency of mishaps and liability, I hope the fertility industry joins in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kahn. And now we'll hear from Dr. O'Brani.
Thank you. The United Kingdom's model for regulation has been held up as a model of good example, and it's a model that has worked well. The UK government has long acknowledged the need for robust and effective regulation of the fertility industry in order to retain public trust and confidence, and in order to promote transparency and accountability. The UK government was first prompted into action following the birth of the first child conceived via fertility treatment in 1978, 40 years ago. After a decade of consultation, the government decided to legislate in this area, and in 1990, legislation was passed which codified the laws and rules governing human embryonic research and fertility treatment. Those laws are backed with criminal sanctions. So failure to comply with the law can result in a jail term or a fine or both, and in some cases for up to 10 years. Only licensed clinics can offer fertility treatment, and there is oversight by an independent statutory agency, which Adam alluded to, called the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. This is set up at arm's length from the government, and it does ensure that there is compliance with the laws and the guidance issued to all clinics. There is guidance which the independent authority issues and updates in a code of practice, and compliance is checked by inspections, which legally must be undertaken every 2 years, but they can also be surprise inspections. Within that code of practice, there's guidance on how human embryos, sperms, and eggs should be handled in order to prevent adverse incidents and mix-ups. So, for instance, the guidance mandates that there are a number of strict identification, cross-checking, and double witnessing procedures that must take place at all stages. To put the regulation into context, in 2017 to 18, there was 80,000 fertility treatments offered in the United Kingdom. Adverse incidents were reported in less than 1% of those 80,000 treatments. Where there are adverse incidents, they are graded, the most serious of which would be the wrong embryo being implanted into a woman, which would be a grade A incident. There were none in 2017 to 18. Where there are any incidents or near misses, they must, by law, be reported within 12 to 24 hours to the regulator. The regulator then has a rigorous process for the reporting, handling, and investigating of all adverse incidents. And as Adam mentioned, the reports of those findings are published nationally and on a public website for all to see. The regulation promotes transparency. It maximises learning, which is really important for the whole sector, so as to prevent their reoccurrence. There are positive lessons that the USA can learn from the UK. We have a well-established regulatory framework, a comprehensive one that's been enforced for 29 years. And IVF in the UK is one of the safest places in the world to receive treatment, primarily because of the dynamic regulation that we have in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Algrani. So we would be happy to take some questions to any of the people up on the podium. So you're here first, yes.
Use the mic.
I know you're referring to an independent authority in the UK. Are you suggesting that we have something implemented similar here in the United States? And is there an agency that you would recommend oversee this issue?
Sure, I appreciate it. Let me start by saying that I receive calls daily from victims of fertility center misconduct. I believe Dr. Algrani just said that in the past 2 years, there hasn't been a single incident of a misplaced embryo into somebody. I've gotten 4 calls about that this month. Something needs to happen. Something needs to change. What we're doing right now is not okay, and Americans are suffering daily. So we could debate what the name of the agency should be like, if it should be subsumed into another agency, if there should be, how we should create new regulations. But what I want all of us here and around the country to understand is that what we are doing right now is not working, and we need to change. Yes.
In this particular case, is there a reason that you suspect that it was a healthcare professional's sperm that was used instead of another donor? Or
So as you can imagine, when a family faces a situation like this, they frantically search for what happened, right? I mean, this is an unimaginable thing, that you have an embryo that is transferred to yourself, to your partner, whoever it is, and the baby that comes out is not genetically related to you. So they searched around, cast about, tried to figure out exactly how this happened and whose sperm was used here. And they have, through their incredible diligence, narrowed it down, narrowed the sperm donor, if you will, down to 5 people, one of whom happened to have been a doctor at the Christ Hospital.
And that's something that we've seen repeatedly. Adam talks about all the calls we get in our office. We get many calls where if the father turns out not to be the father that they thought they were, oftentimes it is medical professionals that are involved, which should freak everyone out massively.
Yes.
But how did they reach that conclusion? How were they able to narrow it down to the medical professionals in that clinic or the hospital?
So in this particular case, the Cardillonis, through the very method they used to find out that Joe Cardilloni, that his sperm was not used, you get a family tree that comes, that you can use. I did this myself. I went on Ancestry.com, right? And you find out all these people who are related to you. And, I knew all of the people who were closely related to me. The stunning thing here is that for the Cardillonis, half of Rebecca's family tree, she had never met before. She had never known these people before. And so through that has identified roughly 5 people who seem quite closely related to her.
So basically the same DNA kit.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Do you have any idea as to why this happened? Do you think it was just mislabeling in the labs? Do you think it was because they tried to create an embryo and it didn't work and they just used somebody else's sperm? What happened?
One of the things that we really want to find out through our lawsuit is what happened. Right now, we have no answers. We reached out to the Institute. We reached out to Dr. Awadallah and Dr. Benke. We reached out to the Christ Hospital. And so far, we know nothing more than you.
And just one more question. What sort of consequence would you like to see the court hand down in this case?
Sure. So nothing will ever make this right. No amount of money will ever make this right. No amount of money, no amount of judgment, nothing that the court can do right now will put Joe and Jennifer Cardilloni in a place where their daughter is biologically related to both of them. So there are a number of things that we want to do through this case, one of which is to ensure that there's accountability to the fertility center who engaged in this misconduct. Another is to find out some answers. How did this happen? So that we can try to ensure that it never happens again. And 2, to see what we can learn about whose sperm was used to create Becca and where Joe Cardilloni's sperm went. Is there another child walking around this earth who's related to Joe Cardilloni? We don't know that answer. Yes.
Are you working with any lawmakers, people, on this issue? Talk to any state, federal regulators?
That's a good question. Do you want to answer the Ohio side of it?
Sure, we did. We had worked with some state senators in Ohio. A guy named Joe Schiavone. He ran for governor there. We've also worked with a number of congressmen. We've not gotten to the next stage. I think where we are now is raising awareness of this issue, and we'll be meeting with lawmakers, I hope, in the near future.
Can we just go to one person who hasn't asked a question yet, and then
Yep.
we'll get to you?
Hi, a couple questions. Thank you. Mr. Wolf, you mentioned that you've received a few calls on this even in the past month. I mean, do you have any sense as to what compels someone to, use their own sperm instead of the one that they, were hired to use? Do you have any sense of what goes on? And then, sorry, I was hoping you could answer, did you ever have a sense, did you do the home DNA kit because you had a feeling she might not be related to you biologically, or was it really just, a fun kind of family thing to get involved with? Thank you.
Joe, you go first.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. So thank you for the question. No, this was this couldn't have been more innocent. It was actually our daughter who decided, what a wonderful Christmas gift for the family. Because we've talked about it on and off, it'd be neat to kind of do it. And so it was literally just, wouldn't it be fun to get our DNA workup and, kind of see who's connected and how far the generations go back. I'm from Italian heritage. Our records don't go back very far. And so it would have been kind of neat, right, to do that. And so, no, it couldn't have been more innocent and more shocking.
You wish you hadn't done it.
She does. She wishes in some ways that, because she's feeling some guilt, right, of the Christmas present. But no, I would say me. If this is some way of us helping change what's happening, then it's worth it.
To get to your question of what would prompt somebody to do this, that is something I have been asking myself. What a sick thing to do. In the cases that we've been handling, where it's the doctor who has used his own sperm. I mean, fortunately, I can't get in the mind of somebody like that. But I don't think we can just attribute this to the fragile male ego. I think that this is a serious sickness that some of these doctors have had, and the consequences of that sickness are felt for generations.
Can I just add
Please.
just add some historical perspective on that? Apparently, the first time that a woman was inseminated with donor sperm was in the late 19th century. And what happened was the doctor who was performing this talked to his medical students, and they chose the medical student who they believed was the most good-looking. The woman was then inseminated with that sperm. She thought all along it was her husband's, and she never found out that her child was not biologically related to her husband. So there's a lot of secrecy here, and the medical profession. This is not the first instance in which a medical professional may have been involved in this type of situation.
So we have one and then two.
Kind of piggybacking off the historical part of it, how old is Rebecca? And I know you said you're getting a lot of calls from people with similar stories. Was there an era in time where this was more common? Do doctors still do this?
So that's a good question. To answer the factual part, Rebecca's 24. I have been called twice in the last month or two by people for whom this happened in the last year or two. And in fact, was just looking at a case the other day where it happened within the last year, where a doctor inserted his sperm into his own client. Yes.
Oh, I just have.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question for the doctor from the UK. You have a national agency that pays for infertility treatments for patients?
No. So in the UK, we have a publicly funded healthcare system, but only 40% is provided by the state and 60% is privately funded.
So UK patients do not have to pay out of pocket for cost of IVF?
60%
Okay.
of people who use IVF do pay privately, but 40% of provision is offered by the state under a publicly funded National Health Service.
And does the UK regulate any other practice of medicine?
So there are certain branches of medicine that are regulated by specialist statutes. So human fertilisation and embryology is one, human tissue and organ donation is another.
Thank you.
I know you guys were mentioning that there's been several lawsuits with the same problem. Is there something written in the contract when you do sign over that to, work with this fertility clinic that gives them the flexibility to make these mistakes in some way? I don't know if I'm wording that correctly, but is there something legally protecting the fertility clinics, and have there been justice in prior cases?
Short answer is no. I hope we could all agree that no fertility center could contract away the ability to make these kinds of mistakes. No fertility center's contract says it's okay for the doctor to use his own sperm, that it's okay for the clinic to use the sperm of some stranger when that's not intended, that it's okay to use a tank that malfunctions and thousands of eggs and embryos are destroyed at once. These are tragedies, right? This is not like, assigning your rights to a piece of furniture or your eyeglasses or, everyday items. We're talking about embryos. We're talking about something from which life springs, right? I have a child. I look at my sons every day and think, can I imagine myself in the Joe Cardelloni's position, where I learn that my sons are not related to me? What kind of world is that we live in, where we could go to a fertility center, everything is done behind the veil, you don't know what's going on, you don't know whose sperm is being used, you don't know where your sperm is going, and you don't know at the end of the day if your child is related to you. That kind of misconduct needs to stop.
Then the patients need to be able to trust the fertility clinics, and the fertility clinics need to have transparency and to be able to be held accountable, and they just aren't right now. So when they go behind that wall of secrecy and they're back in that lab, the patients have to be able to trust that they do the right thing. And right now, there's no reporting requirements when they do something like this. You have to catch it willy-nilly. We're getting the phone calls, not some governmental agency, and that does not strike me as right.
Yeah, maybe another question or two.
Thank you. And just to kind of follow up on that, because you were just talking about reporting requirements and you had mentioned some of the regulations that would be necessary to help curb these kinds of incidences. So when you say reporting requirements, it sounds as though you mean when there's an issue like this, it has to be, broadcast somewhere, where
like
patients can find.
Yes, when I had fertility issues, and we went through the process. You try and do everything you can to check out the various clinics. And the fact of the matter is there's just not a lot of information out there. Yeah. So, wouldn't you like to know if it turned out that one of the clinics, a doctor used his own sperm? I mean, I think that's something somebody would want to know, and then you'd go to a different clinic. Mm-hmm. And so, that at bare minimum, they should have to tell people.
Just as another example, if you found out that the clinic you were considering, like CHA Fertility, just inserted somebody else's embryo into the wrong person, why would you go to CHA Fertility ever again?
And what were some of the other regulations that you believe would be necessary to help prevent this kind of mistake? Yeah.
Professor Khan. Yeah.
Oh.
Professor Khan, you want to do something?
Sure. I mean, in addition to, well, first of all, licensing of embryology labs, so licensing of the labs that handle the embryos that are created.
They're not licensed?
They don't have to be licensed. Many of them are. Some states have stepped in, but federal requirements with respect to the embryo. Now, the labs are certified with respect to blood tests, with respect to diagnosis, but not with respect, they are not required to be certified with respect to embryology. As I said, many of them are, and some states, like California, have stepped in to require that. So mandatory federal licensing, mandatory federal inspections, tougher inspections of the clinics, of the fertility clinics and the labs. Although we have some, and then finally, robust record-keeping standards. So, for example, we have no idea how many children are born each year through sperm donation. Once someone provides sperm, we have no idea what happens to that sperm. The same sperm provider, for example, could have helped to create Becca, and Becca could have hundreds of half-siblings out there. So.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your all coming and your interest in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.